Hi, I'm Andrew Wingate. I've spent about 10 years now working with Microsoft Dynamics and Business Central, previously on the customer side, and the last 4 years I've been on the partner side, implementing and perhaps more importantly, supporting what happens after the implementation phase is done. Have you ever been on a project that went live on time, on budget, on scope, and yet 6 months later, the customer still wasn't happy? You might have personally moved on to a different delivery project before you even found out. So the important fact is, as most good consultants know, is that go live is not the finish line. It's the starting pistol for the business as usual phase of the people of the business really using that business central deployment that you put together for them, and getting all of that value back that they've invested in that setup and that implementation side. And a lot of client side teams, they really are not ready for this. So I think probably the best way to talk about this is I share a common story, all too common. So I often do health checks for Business Central, and usually I'll be speaking to companies where they've been live with BC for some time. It could be a year, it could be longer. A very common element of these checks is that while the project technically delivered everything in the scope that it said it would, and things were signed off, and the business went live with it, the businesses become unhappy or disillusioned, or they don't feel like they're getting the most from Business Central. However, 12 months down the line, and certain things have cropped up. For example, the warehouse team, they've gone back to their spreadsheets. Finance are having to rekey critical data. They don't feel like they're getting the most from the system. There's a feeling that the staff don't necessarily trust the numbers inside the system, and they're doing a lot of checking reports or off-system processing to kind of prove to themselves what Business Central is showing them is the correct number. So ultimately, the users and the leadership are not happy, and they wish they were getting more from the system, which is within their grasp if someone had taken a better ownership post go live. Usually in these kind of scenarios, nothing is technically broken. Sometimes there's a quick fix you can do to make things better. Usually the systems are working as designed from the project, but no one had thought about what happens after the delivery consultants leave. If there was no one who was a system owner for BC on the client side, if there was no one accountable for whether people were actually using BC in the way that it was designed to be used, or using its full capability, or understanding and reviewing the release wave features that come out twice a year. So in these projects, the delivery of the implementation was successful, but post-implementation, things have started to go off track. So why should you care about this? Why does it matter to you? So let's talk about some slightly uncomfortable statistics right now. Only about 40% of ERP customers feel that the system fully met their expectations within the first 2 years. And around a third requires significant post-implementation rework. And only 26% of employees are actively using the system as intended after go live. So those are some pretty scary statistics, okay? But those are the facts that we're dealing with. And Business Central in the UK, for example, is around 30 to 50% of new ERP deployments. So that means that these statistics belong to us, to consultants and partners who are delivering BC. So what are we going to do about that to kind of improve that statistics? So that's the bad news. Of course, the good news is that these causes are very well understood and entirely preventable. The post-go live period is where you can really earn your long-term relationship with the client, or lose it if you don't do it properly. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what I think are some of the most important things to focus on in the post-go live period. What are the warning signs that tell you that stabilization isn't happening? What a good support partner and owner looks like, and how to build a simple framework that moves the customer from go live into confident, sustainable business as usual. Let's start off with stabilization, what it actually means and why it's so often missed. So most project teams think of the go live as delivery complete, mission successful, mission complete. However, those first 30 to 90 days after go live are the most fragile period of any implementation. Users are stressed, workarounds appear overnight, confidence in the data can suffer as a result of that. And so there are three things that determine whether you're successfully stabilizing or if you're facing down the barrel of the next year firefighting. The very first one, which is so important, is ownership. Someone on the customer side must own BC, and not the IT manager and not the project sponsor. It needs to be a genuine internal product owner, someone who understands the system, and make decisions and has the authority to hold the users accountable. And if that person doesn't exist, everything else you do might not stick. Get this person agreed before you go live, wherever you possibly can. It's black and white the difference that can make. The second element I want to talk about is separating out support from improvements. Okay, now this sounds totally obvious, but it's often missed. And in the weeks after go live, everything feels urgent, of course. A user can't raise a purchase order, it's a pretty major problem, okay? So there's a change request to the chart of accounts, lands in the same inbox with the same priority. You need a very clear and simple way to triage what is a break fix and what is a training question, and what is an enhancement and what is a bug that needs to be resolved. You need to log these separately and prioritize these separately, talking all the time to your product owner that we've said in step one was incredibly important, because you can't have your support time being spent on improvements that would potentially be part of phase two. You really want to focus on stabilizing to then understand what are the priorities for that improvement phase two process. And then the third is having a structured hypercare. Rather than just an open door and unlimited support, or however you want to structure it, it's important to put in a structured hypercare period, typically around month end, with defined check-ins, clear log of outstanding items, and agreed date when the customer transitions to the full normal BAU support model. This also, not only does this protect you commercially, but it also serves the customer better because it forces both sides to be very intentional about what needs need to be resolved. So let's talk about some mistakes that can be made that I've seen in the past on Go Live and what I've learned from it. So mistake number one is assuming that adoption will take care of itself. It will not. Users don't like to change their habits because the system went live. Yes, it's a huge relief when you've got that opening balance fully signed off and you're ready to open up business as usual or going into hypercare period. That is a huge moment on any business central implementation. But to have a truly successful project for the long term, you need to focus on that ongoing user adoption of the system. Like I say, users don't like changing habits usually. Of course, you have some people who are early adopters, but the vast body of users, they want to have familiarity, and it's a real challenge to get them to adopt. And users will only change habits if they have a reason to, not even because they know how to. There needs to be some level of consequences if they don't change. The training might have been done 6 weeks before go live. That's largely forgotten by the time they're using the system under pressure. So it's really important, in my view, that we plan for role-specific refresher training in that first month, drop-in sessions so people can, just help the users with bits and bobs, what their problems are, what their issues are, and remind them about the easy things to use, the where to click to do certain things, how to do the shortcuts through the system that really might make Business Central what it is. Mistake number two is all around data quality. And the common thing, that can happen is people start to lose trust in the numbers. And this is almost certainly because the data that was migrated in, which I'm sure there's a separate video for, is, there's an important process around that data migration. And it's so when you're in the middle of the project, bear in mind that go live is not the finish line. It is the starting gun for the rest, for the the beginning of the rest of the time that the firm will be using Business Central. If you see issues in the data migration, if the client team or your own team, whoever's responsible for data cleansing, isn't really hitting the mark, that's not something to cover up and just move on to the next task. That's really important that gets called out and resolved at the time, because it will have a long knock-on effect. And then finally, mistake number three is putting an end to the governance structure you had in place around the project. Now, it's very common to have project governance in place, and then when the delivery budget kind of dries up, because you went live, that project governance disappears. So it's really important to continue that with a business as usual governance. Again, in having the client side product owner involved in that is incredibly important, so that it helps you understand and triage support issues. It helps you better understand and prioritize enhancements, phase two, or other modules that you might want to implement for the client. And it helps you maintain a really close watch on how the system is stabilizing and how are the users recognizing those benefits that were promised right at the start of the project when we did the business case. So what does good post go live support actually look like in practice? So one of the most useful things you can give your customer is a simple health framework. So as part of your ongoing support, where you have regular reviews, they might be every month to begin with, or every other month, or quarterly, just depends on your commercial model. In those meetings where you've got your service delivery manager or the person who's responsible for the support contract on the partner side talking to that product owner on the client side, bring the facts with you. So a very simple one-page report snapshot that looks at user adoption, data quality, process consistency, reporting confidence. You can also look at support patterns and ownership. And you need to score each area. Honestly, you need to work with the client side product owner, because some of this information is only really going to be available to them. It's a report that they may use in their senior leadership meetings or board meetings if they're involved. And it allows you to kind of get the narrative clear from your side. And where things are starting to go off track, it allows you to escalate in a kind of a formal and not hair on fire way of doing things, right? It's a great way to manage that process, to make sure that the engine's firing on all cylinders. Okay, you might want to run this health check, like I say, periodically, maybe every 30 days or 90 days or 6 months. You might use red, amber, green scoring. Really just depends on how you want to kind of communicate that. The most important thing is doing something, not nothing. Just don't leave it for hope. So from there, you're going to want to phase your improvement work. What I would say is don't try and fix everything at once. That's if you take on too much, you can miss traction. The first phase should be to finish off and completely stabilize and standardize. Make sure that everything that should have been working properly at go live is fully stabilized, fully standardized. People are happy with the data, and people are following that process that was defined during the project. And you delivered those refresher training sessions so that users of the system, they're happy with the system, they know how to use it, and they're then coming to you for areas that they want to enhance, bringing on other modules or connecting other systems, in that phase 2. So phase 2 is all around optimizing and embedding further capabilities within the wider Microsoft stack, connected through to Business Central. It might be retiring other systems and bringing that capability into BC. It might be connecting other D365 apps, like D365 Sales is a very common one, or entire other areas like field service. It's so important that when you've got that stable layer, Business Central as your stable system as record, once that's very, very stable foundation, then it makes those follow-on projects far easier to cost up and complete. And also you've got the goodwill of the users who are happy with that, the way that Business Central is delivered. They're happy with the way it's working now. It just makes those follow-on phases that much easier. Final thing to say about the post-implementation processes is that those reviews, I would say, keep them short and regular. Rescore after any changes. It's far better to have short, regular reviews between your managed services, service delivery manager, and the product owner on the client side, than kind of leave a very long gap and then have a lot of things to talk about. You get under the hood on small, easy fixes when you're doing short, regular reviews. And don't forget, of course, Business Central gets updated twice a year with a release wave, and there are minor releases coming all the time as well on those. So it's a really crucial time to point out to the product owner who hasn't necessarily got the time to read all the information coming out about Business Central, because there's a huge amount. There might be some features in there that can make a difference for their users, and they're always very grateful when you can share that. So here is a post-go live checklist that I would encourage you to take away from this video. So number 1, appoint an internal BC product owner before live that's someone who lives on the client side. Number 2, have a well-defined hypercare period in writing with a clear start and end date and clear deliverables. Number 3, set up a very clear and simple to follow triage process that separates the break fix, training, and enhancement requests from day 1. Number 4, be sure to validate any process changes with a business sign-off, not just technical checks, not just agreed on a help desk ticket. Number 5, revisit the role centers that you've configured. And number 6, plan a role-based refresher training for a couple of weeks or for maybe a month after go live. 7, run those health checks, have those periodic reviews with the product owner, might be 30 days, 90 days or so. And finally, number 8, establish a suitable cadence for release wave communications. End users are busy, they've got a lot of pressures. Keeping on top of all the Microsoft news can be very tough. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Mission Implementation, looking at how we make post-go-live support and stabilization work in practice. If you'd like to discuss any of the topics covered here, or you're working through a post-go-live challenge and want a sounding board, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you want guidance on any other stages of implementation, make sure to check out the rest of the Mission Implementation playlist. Thanks.